Okay, sorry about that. Lost connection. Well, my computer went down one. I intend to buy a new computer pretty soon, but until that, I'm gonna have to make do with what I have. So sorry about that. So with that said, let's jump in and get started with our Next.js project. In a moment. And while that's coming up, I'll need to work on bringing the article back up. So this is the command to bring up a Next.js project. So in the terminal, we'll type this in, and I want to install it in the current directory. So I'll go space, then period, press enter. So we'll hit OK. And in a series of commands, we'll say yes to TypeScript, yes to ESLint, yes to Tailwind, no to SRC, yes to the app router, yes to the turbo pack, no to the import alias. Okay, nothing's changed there a whole lot. While it's installing, let me work on bringing up the document. So I think it is dev. Is dev. I want to go dive into Next.js server actions. And here's the young man. So like I said, I don't want to butcher the brother's name, but it's Nikita Blokchanovic. Or I'm sure that's not it. I'm sorry. But he's a self-taught developer, does front-end developer, full stack developer. That's the type of work he does. Joined in 23rd, excuse me, September of 2024. But a really, really good article on server actions. And in fact, a very good series of articles that he's written. All five are listed here. Maybe in the next video, which I intend to do tomorrow, no later than Saturday, we'll go through those articles. And I do want to build on to this current project that we're going to start today using parallel and intercepting routes. But this article really just kind of talks through server actions and how to implement what we just learned in the previous or in the documentation that we just read. And what I liked about it is he's very good at the UI representation, but also it just kind of talks through how to use a server action inside of a client and server component. So we'll go ahead and build this out as well. Okay, so now that it is complete, we'll just go ahead and type npm run dev to start up our server on localhost 3000. And while that is coming up inside of the pages directory, we can remove the image import and we'll start with a new div. For right now, we'll go home page. Inside of this directory, we'll go HTML, body, I think it is root.app, text, um, let me, um, no, it's at, wow. Then I think it is text, small, okay. Okay, this looks good. And then we'll set the height to 100%, the width to 100%, just to get something on screen. Let's minimize this. Okay. Let's go to our localhost 3000. Okay, and on our localhost 3000, we see that we have home page on screen. So what we want to do in this project is simulate or build out a server action in Next.js. I'm not going to worry about setting up a full-blown database. We'll just store it within the local storage in our browser. So if we refresh the screen, we may lose some of the functionality, or excuse me, if we update the code upon refresh, we'll lose some of the functionality, but otherwise we're just going to store it locally. So to get started, to kind of implement that, inside of the root directory, add a folder named lib, and inside of it, let's add a file named server notes.ts. And then inside of this file, we'll start by defining the type. The object name will be note. Inside of the note, we want to pass in the properties that our note will possess, and it will have a number. And this should be lowercase, sorry about that. A title, which will be a string, and then content, which will also be a string. And then we're going to export a const named notes. That will be defined as the note object that we just created. And inside of it, we want to pass in we want to store that in an array. And we're going to say that this is going to be equal to an empty array. And this is going to represent the database for our notes that we'll store them in. Basically, what this is saying that we're going to export a const named notes that will be defined as the note object. That note object will take in a ID, which will be a number, a title, which will be a string, and content, which will be a string. So perfect. We can go ahead and close that out. And for right now, we'll go ahead and close out the page.tsx file. The other main piece that we'll need to establish is the actual actions that go along with the server action to actually the functions that we'll need to create. So let's take a look at the documentation from Nikita, and let's just see what he has written up. So server actions are defined using the use server directive, which we just learned. The primary two ways are to define them is inside of a function. A simple a simple and convenient approach is to place the server action directly within the server component. And this is just placing it within the page.tsx file. In this case, he has a components folder with a file named catalog.tsx, and he is exporting a function named catalog that has a asynchronous function named delete product that'll be ran directly on the server, given the ability to delete a product based on what it is. That is what it looks like when you have both inside of one file. If you want to place it inside of a separate file, which is what we're going to do, we'll have an actions directory with a file named load products or whatever you want to call it. But it will be indicated by a .tsx file. At the top of it, you'll have the use server directive, and you'll make sure that you're exporting a asynchronous function. Using server actions for mutations. So let's say you need to delete a product from the catalog. Traditionally, you would send a delete request via an API, process the response, and update the interface. And that's what's being done here. You're using a event handler with the request and response. It's been a while since I've written this code. Looks like we're utilizing a switch statement, passing in the request method. And of course, that method can either be a get, delete, can also be create, or an update. But it looks like for right now in this example, he just has get and delete. The get request will just be making a request and fetching all of the data. Inside the delete request, you're passing an ID so you know which product item to delete. He's using Superbase in this example. And then from the table of products, you're going to delete the product. And that request looks like it takes in two parameters, a ID and a ID and a product ID. And if it is successful, it's going to return the status of 200 with a message of success. And the switch statement, that is just a keyword that goes along with it. And by default, it's going to allow a get, a post, and delete. Sorry, I said create, excuse me, it should have been post. And here it is just returning the status and event, the method or the, yes, excuse me, that the method that passed in isn't one of the allowed methods. And then it looks like it has a asynchronous function named catalog that is making a fetch request to the API/catalog. And we're destructuring out the data, products, and mutate. And we have a handle delete function, which makes a request, a fetch request to the API utilizing the method. Okay. And that is being passed into a product card. So it looks like that product card just receives a prop of on delete so that you can have the ability to delete the individual product based on that product card. That's what it would look like prior to server actions. Quite a bit of code could be very confusing, but I think for most of us that learn the code in a traditional setting, this is probably the traditional method that you would have learned. Handling your errors, creating the function, wrapping everything in a try-catch block, making the fetch request. In the event you get it, return a success message and do something with the data. Refresh the screen. If it is not successful, then you want to return some form of an error message. Now, in the server action, it is much simpler. In this example, it looks like it's being stored in a separate directory, in a separate file. Have the file name product.tsx. At the top of it, it has the use server directive. Importing the function to create a client request to Superbase, exporting the const name delete product, which is a asynchronous function. It receives a product ID, which is being defined as a string. Inside the function, it establishes the connection to Superbase. And then upon that connection, utilizing the .from method inside of the products table, deleting the product that it has defined based on the ID. And in this example, it is using revalidate path. So it appears that you have the ability to delete this item or this product, I should say, on this specific page. And it is going to delete immediately from this page without redirecting you to a different page. Here's what the component would look like. It has an asynchronous function named catalog. So we know that this is a server component. We are importing the get all products and delete product functions from the actions directory, and those are the action names. Inside the return statement, it is returning a product list, and this appears to just be a UI layout of the list. And then inside of that list, it is returning a product card that accepts the key as the ID, or the ID is representing the key. And then it also passing a submit handler or event handler, of on delete, and we're passing in the delete product function. So now there's no need to worry about making a client side request. Everything happens server side. When you're dealing with server side requests, or any requests for that matter, you want to speak through how to handle the cache management. Usually in server side, or client side requests, the page is uploaded immediately, so that isn't as prominent. But because you're dealing with server side requests, and this is also Next.js, you want to make sure that you define or understand how you handle the cache or the storage of the data. So he has a section of cache management, which is fantastic. Revalidate path and revalidate tag. After performing the mutation, you need to update the cache so that the changes are reflected in the UI. Next.js provides two functions for this. The revalidate path, which refreshes the cache for a specific path. For example, if a product is deleted, you would need to revalidate the catalog path to display the up-to-date data, which is what we just spoke about. Revalidate tag refreshes a specific piece of data rather than the whole page using the actual tag. So if you have parallel routes, this would probably be something great, or just a page that renders multiple components, not all coming from the same request. Revalidating just the actual tag and not the entire page is a much better user experience. So we'll look to implement that, maybe not in this video, but in a upcoming series. So this just kind of shows what the server-side asynchronous request would look like. This is a client-side a components directory with a file named catalog.tsx. Here it is making a fetch request to a specific URL, and it is grabbing the next tags catalog. We'll have some data that's going to be returned, and then we can revalidate our request within a server action. So here it is using or marking the use server or utilizing the use server directive so that we know that this is going to be performed strictly on the server. We're going to import create client from superbase-server, and we're using, in this example, looks like revalidate tag, which is coming from next cache. Here we're exporting a const named delete product, and we're passing in the product ID, getting the connection to Superbase, making a request or utilizing the products table, the .delete method, passing in the ID, and just revalidating just the catalog section of the page. So that's pretty cool. Fetching data with server actions. While the server actions are often introduced as tools for data mutations, they can also be used to fetch data directly from the server. Here's what it looks like. So in this example, it has an actions directory, the load products.tsx. It has the file marked as use server, which is a asynchronous function inside of that file. All of the functions are going to be asynchronous. In this example, it's just loading products from the server. And you have the ability to use it within a client component or within a component. This one is a server component. And you can tell by the asynchronous request. Finally, we add the component to the catalog page using suspense to handle the loading state. So we'll talk about suspense in an upcoming video as well. But basically with this, and I believe I've already posted a little quick video about it. But anyway, basically with that, it allows us to update just that specific portion of the UI without updating the entire page while we're waiting on that data to load. So it's a pretty cool feature. You basically just import it from React, and it has to be used in a server-side file. You import it from React, and it's being used inside of an asynchronous function. You wrap the rendering of the list with suspense and just pass in fallback and whatever you want to be displayed in the fallback. In this example, they're utilizing a catalog, but you can type in a string or maybe loading or pass in a div and some additional content. But the better method or the most optimal method will probably be utilizing a separate component. In this example, it is a catalog skeleton. So at first, this may seem like a powerful way to handle data, but there are two important things to keep in mind. Server actions are executed sequentially. This is one of the biggest limitations. Each server action is executed strictly one after the other. This means that if you're making several server requests, fetching products, catalogs, or recommendations, they cannot happen in parallel, unlike standard fetch, where you can perform multiple parallel requests and await their completion simultaneously. Here, the sequential execution may slow down the response time and performance. Critical scenarios, this could become an issue. So basically what this is saying is that a server request is going to happen one after another. So if Item 2 or item 4 won't load until item 3, item 2, and item 1 have loaded. So even if item 2 is ready to be displayed, it's not going to display until the prior item have loaded. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're using server actions. They're going to be executed sequentially. Server action requests are always post requests. Another key point is that all server action requests, regardless of their purpose, use the post method. While this may not be critical in most cases, traditional API requests in Next.js offer more flexibility. They can accept GET requests, enable caching, and more efficient load distribution. Ultimately, the choice is yours. Server actions simplify the architecture of your app, eliminating the need for API routes for both mutations and event data. But if you require parallel data loading or caching GET requests, traditional API routes might still be suitable. So basically what this is saying is that every request with a server action is a post request. You don't make any GET requests. Based upon the needs of the application, you'll need to keep that in mind because it will impact the way your data is rendered and how you want to handle the caching of your data, as in making requests and updating data that's being refreshed from your server. So we'll kind of talk through that based upon the application, but these are just things just to keep in mind. Using server actions with forms, server actions can significantly simplify form handling in React by allowing HTML forms to directly connect to the server-side logic. In Next.js, this is implemented by passing server actions as the form action. Once the form is submitted, the server function receives the form data object and can process it like any other server-side operation. Here's an example. So here what we have is a directory named actions with a create product.tsx file. So in this file, we have the server function marked within the client side file. No, I'm sorry, this is separate. So this file is marked as use server. It has an asynchronous function and it is accepting the form data. You start by establishing the connection to Supabase, identifying the products table, and just stating that you want to use the insert method, and the title, description, price, category ID are the items that need to be defined to insert data into the products table. The title is being defined as formdata.get. Description is defined as formdata.get description, and title is formdata.get title. Price is formdata.get price. Category ID is formdata.get category ID. And then once it has successfully updated the table with the new product, we're going to redirect the user back to the dashboard /products/data.id page. And that is the page that is being created here. So basically what it is doing is it's creating the product. And then once the product is created, it's going to redirect the user to that individual ID page. In this example, the create product is going to take the form data, save the new product into the database, then redirect the user to the newly created products page. Yep. Now let's see how the server action integrates with the form. So in this form, it's marked as use client, which is what's recommended from Next. It's bringing in the create product action, and you have to mark it as use client because you're using the form status from React DOM. We have a function named create product form, destructuring the pending state from use form status. And inside of the return statement, we have the form with the action prop, and we're passing in create product. Using the button to handle the is loading pending state. So what appears to be happening here is that we're going to show, or that we have the ability eventually to show a pending state of this product once we click the create product button. As you can see, the server action is simply passed into the form action attribute where the form is submitted. It asynchronously runs the server function create product. Yep. However, there are key things with this route. Asynchronous handling with use form status. React added the support for tracking form status through the use form status hook. This form returns an object containing the pending field, which indicates whether the form submission is in progress. This is useful for showing loading indicators and preventing duplicate submissions while the form is being processed. Post requests and redirects, just like with data fetching form using server actions, are always submitted via post. This means you can't cache these requests, but the form operations like create or updating the data caching isn't necessary. Plus, server actions unlock the ability to perform server-side redirects as seen in our example with the redirect function. That's correct. Adding server actions to the form makes handling them incredibly simple and elegant, reducing the amount of client-side code and improving your app's architecture. However, it is critical to remember that these requests are always processed sequentially and must use the post method. You'll need to weigh this when deciding whether between server actions and more traditional API routes. Here's just talking more about how it's streamlined, how it handles data, eliminating the need for client-side API calls, letting you perform server-side operations directly from the components. This reduces the app's complexities and lightens the client load, ultimately leading to a faster and more responsive user experience. I totally agree. Okay, so that is basically the article, and I thought this was a fantastic read that really kind of talked through server actions in Next.js. So what we want to do now is implement what we just read through and create our own server action using Next.js. So we just created the latest version of a Next.js file. Basically what I have is just a page.tsx that returns a home page. We updated the global styling just to define the height, width, and text size of the app. Size of the app. The key thing that we have to kick us off is a lib directory with a file named servernotes.ts. This is going to represent the database of our application. We have a type object named note with key values of ID, title, and content. And the ID is going to be represented by a number, the title, a string, content will also be a string. So now what we want to do is establish the ability to create a note. We'll start with that first. So inside of the lib directory, we'll add a folder named actions.ts. So with this approach, I've decided that we're going to establish the server actions in a separate file versus having them directly within the page component. So within this file, we know we want to set this as or add the use server directive. We'll go ahead and import revalidate path. This is going to come from next cache. We'll also import redirect. That will come from next navigation. And then finally, we will need to import our database. If you're using a traditional database or traditional ORM like Mongoose or Prisma or something to that effect, that is what you'll be importing now. But in this example, we're just going to import notes, and that is going to come from /server notes. So the first action that we want to create or that we want to add is the ability to create a note. So we'll create a export asynchronous function and we'll name it create note. We'll pass in the form data. The inside of it, we want to capture the title, which will be destructured, or which will be captured from form data.get. And what we want to get is the title as a string. Then we'll also want to capture the content, and that is going to be from form data.get content, and that will be as a string. We'll start with a little bit of validation if we don't get a title or content. Then, you know what, we can just type return. Now let's create the note object, or a const that's going to hold the note object. So we'll say const new note and set it equal to object. For the ID, we'll just go date.now to keep it simple. Date.now, excuse me. And the new note will also have the title and content. Add a comma there. And then to add this new note to the array of notes that we're going to store locally, what we want to do is access the notes array that we just destructured. So we'll say notes dot unshift, which is going to basically add the note to the end of the array, the latest note to the end of the array. And we'll want to pass in the new note. And instead of bringing in revalidate path right now, I'm going to bring it in later so that we can show how it works and what it looks like when we have it versus when we don't have it. Okay, so that is the completion of the first function to create a note. And I think what we'll do is have the ability to create a note on the, you know what, we can set up a separate page to create a note, or do we want to add it on the actual page itself? Let me think about it for a second. You know what? We'll set it up on a separate page. So let's do this. So before we set up set up the ability to create a note, I'm sorry, let me think of how we want this to actually function. Okay, sorry about that. So let's go ahead and add the ability to get notes first. So we'll close out both of these open files. We'll go to the page.tsx. At the top, let's start by importing our notes. This is going to come from server notes. We already have the file marked as asynchronous. So what I'll do next is add some simple styling to the page. Excuse me. So we'll start with a div. We'll give it a class name of container. And I'll just add a const name container and set it equal to a padding of 6, a max width of screen large, say MX auto. Background color will be gray of 50. What's it? Min height will be screen. Save it. And you can see it is now updated. And just so you can see it a little better, hold on. Yep, misspelled it. Let's make that 500. Okay, yep, it's working. All right. So then I want a title on the page. We'll set that to a H1. And we'll just call this Notes app. This will be the heading. So we'll give this a class name or a name of heading and set it equal to const. Text will be extra large. Make the text color neutral 700. And we'll set the font to light. Let me just add this H1 with a class name of heading. Save it. See it updated. We'll set this to bold. So what I'm basically doing for the styling is creating it in a separate or setting it in const versus having it directly inside the class name. That way it's a little easier to keep up with. And it also makes it a little easier to make changes to it and read it if you wanted to make any updates. This is basically very similar to what you would do if you were writing it with Sass and just giving it class names and styling it separately. So I'm just using a different approach. Same concept though. So what I want to do now is inside of a div, let's just go ahead and render a message on screen to make a request to check all of our notes. So we'll give this div a class name of space on the Y of 4. Inside the div, let's get access to the notes array, which is our local database. And we'll say if the length is equal to 0, we'll pass in a message to the user that reads no notes yet. And I'll go ahead and add the conditional rendering and we'll just say notes just so we can get something on screen. And we see the message is no notes yet. All right, so I'm going to style this empty state message. So we'll say const. We can name this const empty empty state. And then inside of the p tag, we'll go ahead and pass in a class name of empty state. To give it some styling, we'll set the text color to text neutral 500. And then let me wrap that in parentheses. Update it, and you see the color has been updated. So we'll update the conditional rendering of the notes mapping. Basically what this is saying is that if the notes is empty, Then we'll pass in the empty state message. Otherwise, we want to pass a div and display those notes that have been created. So we'll say, actually, we'll remove this div. I'm just going to copy it and delete it. And we'll say notes.map. For each of the notes in the database, we're going to name it note. And inside of this, we'll pass a div. Oh, I got something wrong with my syntax here. It doesn't need any JavaScript because it's already within JavaScript. So inside of the conditional rendering, if we do have notes, we want to pass in notes.map. And for each note inside the notes database or array, we want to display something on screen. So we'll name it note. We'll start with a div that receives a key of note.id. And we'll give this a class name of card, but we won't worry about it just yet. Inside of the div, we want to display the title. So we'll give it a H2. Sorry. And that is going to be note.title. So we'll have a const named card. We'll set it equal to border. We'll set the border to neutral. We'll set it neutral 200. And we'll set the background color to white. Give it some padding of 4. And we'll set the corners as rounded. The H2 will have a class name of card title. Create a const for it. We'll go const card title. And we'll set it equal to text size of large. Font will be semi-bold. And we'll make the text neutral 800. And I think that'll be all that I'll pass into it for right now. So now let's utilize the server function that we created to have the ability to create a note. And I'm going to have this ability on a separate route so it won't be set on the actual home page. To create a route in Next.js, inside of the app directory, you'll add a folder that will represent the name of that route. In this case, we're going to name it create. And we'll add a file named page.tsx, which will be the actual page itself. We'll use the RAFC snippet of create page. We'll use the RAFC snippet to create a component. And we're going to name this component create page. We'll hit save. Now, let's add or open up another file or another tab and name that. We'll open up another tab and we're going to go to localhost 3000/create, which is the route that we just created. And you can see that we have create page on screen. So what I want to do in this route is add the ability to create a note. So what I'll do is we'll actually remove this since we have something on screen, and we'll create an export default. We'll name it function, or excuse me, we'll have an export default function. We'll name it create page. We could make this asynchronous, but it really won't matter. Inside the return statement, we'll add a div, and I'll just add create page just to make sure it's working. Okay, you see that there. Inside the div, we'll add a class name of max or mx auto. We'll set the max width to screen large and give it some padding of 6. We see the padding, we see it adjusted. We can remove this, replace it with the H1. Inside the H1, we'll name this create note page. For this one, we'll just keep it simple. We'll add a class name of text, extra large. We'll make the font bold and a margin bottom of 6. Underneath the H1, let's add a form. And inside the form, remember to access or to utilize the action, the server action, we'll need to use the action prop and pass in the function. So let's go ahead and import the create note function. And that should come from @lib/actions. And then we'll pass in create note inside the action that's inside the form. For this, I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to add a div with an input, and we'll add a label. Right above the input, let's add a label. We'll give it a class name of block, margin bottom of 2. The text will be small. We'll set the font to medium, and the text color will be neutral 700. For this label, we'll just state note title. Oh, I misspelled you server. Sorry. Server. There we go. Okay. Then underneath it, we'll have a input, and this should be a closing input. We'll give this a placeholder of enter title, just so we can see something. You see it there. With a class name of border, padding of 2, rounded with a width of 4. You see that listed there. So the type for this input will be text. The name will be title, which will correspond with the data that we're sending to the server function. We'll set the name, we have the name, the type, and we'll add this as required just for some client-side validation. And then inside of the form underneath the input, we'll add another div. We'll give it a label of content. Save it. We see it listed right there. Inside the label, let's add a class name of, actually, we can just copy this exact same label, paste it here, save it, and we see we have a slight update. Underneath the closing tag, we'll add a text area for the content. We'll give it a name of content. placeholder of write your note content. Hit save. The class name with border, padding of 2. We'll go rounded. Width will be full. And we'll go min height of, let's make this 200 pixels. Add a border. There we go. Go outline none. And I'll do the same for the input. Okay, perfect. And I think we need to add there I put the equal sign, padding of 2. There we go. Last but not least, inside of the form, hold on, made a mistake here. Let's remove this div, copy it, and place it right after the other closing div. I'm sorry. That should give it a little more space. That's perfect. Okay, so right after the last closing div, right above the form, we'll add a button with create note inside of it. Inside the button, we'll give it a type of submit with a class name of background neutral 800. The text will be white. Padding on the X of, we'll go 6, Y of 2. Hit save. Okay, and we see our button. I think I'll go rounded. The hover background color will change to neutral. If it's 800, we'll go 500. 500, sorry. There we go. Okay. So with this, if everything works successfully, we should have the ability to create a note. And once we create a note, from there, we should see that note displayed on our homepage. So let's go ahead and test this out. So we'll say first note with ability updated. We'll click create note. And we notice that the page refreshed, or excuse me, we notice that the data revalidated because the form is now empty, but it didn't redirect, and we don't know if it actually worked. So if we go back to the home page, refresh the screen, it is not showing a new note. So let's take a look at our code and see what we have. So inside of the lib directory, we'll go to the actions folder. And I think what we may want to do is once we create the note, let's go with redirect. We'll redirect the user back to the home route. So now let's go test with redirect. It did not redirect us. Let me try it again. Test, no. Title. It'll help if you spell content correct. Content. Make sure I didn't misspell The text area should have, I'm sorry, it should have a name of content. And yeah, the name and, well, we won't have to worry about ID. Sorry about that. So we now have the text area has the name, that has title. All right, let's try it now. We'll go testing, testing now. Hmm, let's see. Content, content title, date dot now, notes dot upshift. Yeah, try this again. New notes. Let's take a look at the dev tools and see what we get. The network. So it's saying that it is posting, but it's not redirecting, nor is it must revalidate. There we go. Revalidate path. Have the post request. It's okay. And let's see here. Let's go with refresh. Uh-oh. See all of my statuses there. We're good. Testing. Testing with update. So this under redirect. Let's see what we get now. Still not redirect there. Card notes. Yes, yeah. It's capturing the notes there. Huh. You shouldn't need the ID, but I'm going to add it. Just go back to localhost 3000/create. And this is the create page. We go testing there. So it is revalidating, saying it's posting, but It's not redirecting, nor is it showing data. As soon as you say we're creating no phone data. Duh. If title. Sorry, if no title or if no content. Jeez, I missed that. So let's go testing. There we go. And if we refresh the page, it did redirect. But what we want to do is let's revalidate the path. Let me see something. Revalidate path. We'll go back to /create. We'll go new note. Testing now. So it did revalidate, but it's not showing our new note. Let's go back to the page. Stop map. And we want to show the note title. Yep, that looks good. Default async, but it shouldn't matter. Okay, so that part appears to be working, but we just need the notes length is equal to 0. Showing the empty state, and then we're saying notes.map. Each note show the note card. Yep. Content. Yep, that matches. Let me see something here. I think I let notes equal ID would be a number. Title would be a string. The content would be a string. Otherwise, we want to pass a empty array. Create test testing.